There are many emotions that hang in one's mind upon gazing at the vestiges of the fallen. Like the caustic sensation of sweltering air at noon, the oppressive ambience of the subterranean tomb carried the same invisible tonality for the explorers within. Every step taken had the desolate halls grow louder, the echoes drift sharper, and the looming imposing bulkhead weighing ever closer. Every explorer felt the sensation subtly whisper to their mind. Some would stop, gazing at the contrast between the rusted-aged metal and rock and the slight glimmer of their own matte white suits for a few drawn-out seconds. They would contemplate, unexplainable emotions and feelings silently gulching in the back of their subconscious, until another explorer would pat them on the back, bringing back their focus to the task at hand. They all did it, knowingly or not, wonder and ponder, and how could they not? For they walked in the hallowed halls of a bygone triumph, an omen to the last dying breath of civilization, of all its peoples, of all its cultures, its history, achievements and follies. Now gone to the endless shifting tides of time, the last mark of their collective struggle on the scorched irradiated rock they once called home, being the sole and only monument to what once was. "Is this it?" one of the explorers called out in a tired, numb voice, staring at the looming bulkhead that lay at the end of the hallway. "Yeah, this is it. The final mystery." The entry was sealed. Multiple layers of steel, gears and hydraulics visibly separating the explorers from the contents within. It was distinctly larger than the explorers that stood before it, like the entrance to a grand vault. Yet it posed only as an obstacle, not as a true barrier. One of the explorers crouched down, removing a tripod, and a bulking rectangular device, carefully attaching and adjusting the device's aim, while the other suddenly went about the preparations needed to thaw the door open. Each explorer held their thoughts and reservations to themselves as they moved about. Some wondered if they'd finally get the answers they spent the past year searching for, hoping that the 58 years of interstellar slumber they'd endured would finally reap its reward. Others more cynically expected only mere fragmented skeletons to be found beyond the sealed entrance. Once the explorers had finished setting up, the fate of the bulkhead was sealed. The motivational force of the solid-state laser cutter effortlessly pierced the ancient steel and hydraulics hidden within. A flurry of white-hot metal began to pour from the bulkhead, slowly sagging ever more as the imperceptible ultraviolet laser pierced deeper into the bulkhead's superstructure. Then, in one violent outburst, the massive bulkhead thunderously fell against the rusted floor, molten metal peeling away from the contents within. Bright, monochromatic rays of light belted into the now revealed pathway as the explorers slowly made their way inside, cautiously pacing around the scattered remains of molten metal from the slack bulkhead. Their visit marked the first in what had been centuries of sterile isolation. As the opaque visors swept into the unknown space, an evident particularity emerged. For the floors, the walls, even the ceiling, were that of a gleaming sterile white, untouched by the centuries of wear and tear witnessed across the explorers' travels. Soon they found themselves passing through an open doorway, leading to a massive room that, without words, described itself as the brains of the subterranean portion of the facility. Yet to what purpose it owed the explorers could not fathom. A litany of the computer terminals, visual displays and archaic console controls organized the room, with utilitarian alien furniture sitting across the various terminals. Yet unlike the previous scenes they had investigated beforehand, every piece of equipment and furniture was oddly clean. One of the explorers studied the assortment of alien paraphernalia dotted across the room in perplexion. There was already a central operations room at the spire. What's the point of this place then? Yeah, room's a lot bigger, not to mention more advanced than what the others found. As the explorers began to inspect the alien room, more questions began to emerge. "No dust or rust here," remarked another explorer. "This place must have been completely sealed from the outside, though there's some sort of nifty filtration system that somehow kept the fallout out. Can't be. Whatever power this place must have broken a long time ago. Never has to be optimistic. Does anyone see any switches for the lights here?" As if by divine miracle, one of the explorers tripped across a lofty pair of wires. Within seconds, an explosion of light engulfed the room, as lights, terminals and displays were reinvigorated with an electric beat that they'd not felt for centuries. What was more pressing was the largest of the displays, hanging from the ceiling in the center point of the room. For it lit up not with an alien screen full of indecipherable words, but with a face, and more importantly, a voice. Alright. Last recording. Here it goes. 3, 2, 1. The display hung in solitude, as the explorers all turned their gaze to it, visceral shades of color lighting up as the video turned to show the alien speaker's face. A face that was alien and foreign as it was to the explorers, regarded itself with an aura of fatigue and anxiousness to almost seem relatable in the eyes of the tired explorers. Greetings, visitors. Before I get started, I know there is much to be said, much to be explained. Yet first I must say, I am sorely regretful that we will not be able to meet one another, that our species will never know the songs of friendship, of camaraderie, that we will never be able to gaze upon one another's eyes and see the wondrous spark of life and spirit with each of our souls, that we, fellow siblings in this vast expanse of the cosmos, will forever be separated, and that our only interaction will be this. My lonesome self, talking to a screen, in the vague hopes that one day you will find this long after our demise. I know. Quite disappointing to say the least for both you and I. And for that I'm sincerely sorry. Words fail to convey my remorse, yet I will try to make right with the time that I have now. Disbelief was the sensation in each and every one of the explorers' faces. If one could gaze behind their opaque visors, they would find unhinged jaws open, in awe for what lay before their eyes. So much so that the words of the speaker did little to dampen their amazement. They had never actually seen one of their faces before. Sure, computer-generated renders and post-mortem inspections into their skeletal remains had yielded a well-rounded idea of what they looked like. Yet none of that equaled seeing their cosmic messenger in the flesh, talking to them. The same messenger that spent decades painstakingly crawling through the cosmos, just in the hope to one day meet one another. Now, you have no possible idea on how much your visit here means to me, means to us, and to this I thank you with all my being, for trekking across the abyss that marks our stars, or in the hopes of communicating with a civilization that has most definitely ceased to exist. Now, I'm sure you have many questions that of our culture, our history, our sciences, everything that a civilization embodies. Lucky for you, we made the effort of cataloguing and storing our collective expanse of knowledge within this facility. I'll trust you'll find it, just like how you got past the vault door. Now, for what happened to us? Well, I'm afraid I'm against the clock as I record this. I will give you an obituary. One of me, my people, my civilization, my species. Because we owe you. Well, really, I owe you an explanation. It was me that dragged you all the way here in the first place. The figure seemed to chuckle. That of irony, or that of remorseful sorrow, the explorers could not tell. Now, our civilization, our people, our history. Oh, where do I start now? I could start with the glories of our civilization, of our golden age, where we built towers that rival the heavens, created wonders, both physical and digital, that encompassed the peoples of our world, and a sense of endless possibilities that we held about the universe. Yet, you've seen our world. That of a radioactive husk. One that I doubt has changed even in the centuries since I recorded this final memoir of sorts. The alien's visage was that of a fatigued soul. His face showed decades worth of wrinkles. His visible facial muscles were as rigid as steel, and his skin as rough as sand. Yet the figure was not an elderly being, for the shadowed outlines of thick musculature gave way to the speaker's bulking figure, a feature only covered by a worn-out white attire. "Looks like he was starving," one of the explorers commented, as the figure seemed to look for his script of an old, archaic tablet. "I wouldn't say starving, more stressed than anything else," another added. Now, where was I? Ah yes, our humble world, our world that was in its final death throes, our collective civilization living on borrowed time, as our world receded from us. Now I could spend years talking of the causes, the mistakes, the error of our ways. It was all quite simple, really. We'd collected a debt of sorts over the years. Centuries of environmental degradation, resource exploitation, and wanton industrialization building up quite a tab for us. And, well, all debts were repaid eventually in full, whether we realize it or not. And when our due was up, well, it was a rather brutal thing. All strung across the decades. Rising tides, changing temperatures, crop failures, ecosystem collapses. I wasn't alive to see it, but my grandparents used to tell me stories about those harsh years. Unknown to them, it was the beginning of the end for all of us. Now I won't levy the blame on the generations past, for the dead can't speak for themselves. Instead I'll take my mantle as the sole ambassador for a civilization that has long since groveled to ash, to go on and explain how we failed. We'd wasted our time in the light, wasted our resources, our opportunities. We never managed to sustain interplanetary flight, never managed to change our irrevocable consumption, and even in an age of abundant information and knowledge, we never managed to quell our ignorance. It's all quite poetic, really. In our moment of greyness, we embraced ignorance, too blinded by our grandeur and triumphs to gaze upon the ever-growing cracks at our foundations, of all our systematic issues and flaws that we've made ourselves oblivious to. Such would doom us to our graves. I don't get it, one of the explorers remarked. This all sounds just like... My god, they were just like us. As the speaker took a moment to breathe, the eyes of the explorers turned elsewhere. They scanned across the lit room of electronics and displays, curious as to what information they held. Some stepped out of the crowd, diverging their focus away from the speaker and onto the trove of potential treasure that every piece of alien electronics represented. Yet upon gazing at one of the alien screens, a sudden epiphany erupted across the explorers' ranks. For the screens were not that of indecipherable alien characters, but rather crude yet very understandable series of letters and symbols, as if it was one of their own languages. 29 light years from home, and the only fully functioning piece of alien electronics they'd found wasn't in an alien tongue or dialect, but their very own. As word carried from explorer to explorer, there was a sudden surge of amazement and confusion, yet as the realization dug further into the minds of the explorers, a creep of anxiety followed. It was one thing that they single-handedly managed to effectively decipher an alien tongue, yet it only begged the question, why? What could have possibly compelled such a baffling odd decision? It was one monumental task to even partially translate an alien language, yet to integrate the aforementioned language into their own computer systems. It was as if they never expected themselves to ever actually operate whatever machinations lay dormant within their own facility. Yet there are still so many unknowns about, so the explorers merely carry their attention back to the tale of the speaker. By the time I was born, the dream of tomorrow was all but buried. The demands of the present lay before me and my generation. Survival. That was the demand of all demands. To survive in a world ever more so teetering on total collapse, amongst the ruins of an age nobody remembers. Yet the decaying powers that still clung against the ties of history weren't so inclined on surviving altogether. No. They were far more interested in allocating vital resources to fighting pointless wars and ideological struggles in a world ever hanging by a thread. And for what? The figure seemed to belch out in guttural laughter, yet one with the ever-noticeable accent of shame. Laughter was slowly composing itself in front of the camera. I used to live in a city on the coast. It was your typical city for the time, filled with ruined skyscrapers and abandoned buildings, air the taste of lead, streets flooding daily, muggings and murders as common as bugs and birds. Yet even in spite of all of this, we got by. Never had many haves in life, yet I considered myself more blessed than others. I always had a view of the ocean, a view that was simply beautiful. Even in the polluted velvet skies that clouded the city, I would always admire the ocean. Me and my family would spend days at a time on our fishing trolley at sea, working off the tires or whatever meager bounties we could scavenge. It was hard work with little reward, yet it being out there felt like heaven to me, an oasis in comparison to the crumbling seawalls of a decrepit city and the people on their last legs. And during nights, how the stars were so fascinatingly beautiful to look at. I had a good childhood, all things considered. Only saw a few people murdered, got an education, got a government job. A few months after I left, well, a nuclear weapon went off. A small tactical yield, the type loved by terrorists. It was all that was needed to submerge a city of 5 million under the tides. For what reason I will never know. Yet it was hardly considered a tragedy for the time. Local warlords and despots filled in the chaos. Religious extremism, ideological terrorism, and fervent survivalism took hold. The government never went back in, no point to it. In the eyes of the elites, the rampant barbarism and self-cannibalizing tendency that slowly affected the remnant of our civilization were inevitable. They disregarded such offense, rather implemented their methodical strategy of controlled decline. It was their way of admitting that everything was slowly collapsing, that we were simply doomed. This was how far gone our collective civilization had become. Truly a nature struggle, scarcity and deprivation, slowly cannibalizing everything we once accomplished in a sort of suicidal insanity. Where once we built roads, founded monuments, and reached for the skies, we now sunk inwards, digging our own damned graves that we one day inhabit. It was at the 11th hour, did it all really click? The remnants of once great nations finally readied themselves to settle one final score. I never knew what it was all about. Nobody really did. Everyone except the elites, who seemed fixated on avenging struggles and grievances that none truly cared or even remembered for. But propaganda truly is the most intoxicating of drugs. With enough effort and patience, anyone could be convinced of an ideal, of a problem, and of an enemy. I was no different. Reserves were mobilized, drone swarms reactivated, and silos plotted, in with new destinations. It seemed like the end was upon us. A century of barbarism and cannibalism of civilization, finally reaching its climax. The culminating finale of a story that has spanned tens of millennia. None of the elite dare to admit the grim truth, that this war would be the end of everything. For the politicians, executives, tyrants and despots, they were all gripped in insanity. I'd seen it firsthand, risking through the aristocratic levels of government, a form of such pure, unadulterated insanity that led one to think themselves immortal, confident of one's invulnerability, even in the face of total, unequivocally assured annihilation. And so we waited. Waited for the brink. Waited for the final dying gasp of our civilization to be buried under nuclear ash. Yet, as if the divine had not forsaken us, coming back as if to send their moribund children one final hint of salvation. For they sent us you. They sent us your message at the twilight of our species. That fabled minute-long blast of light, encoded in such a sophisticated and artistic binary. A message that would show us a different world, a different people, a different fate. It's the realization that we weren't alone, that somewhere in the deep cosmos lived a people just like us, enduring the struggles of the universe. You should have seen the awe people had as the newscast began to show the initially deciphered transmission. A beautiful blue ball, spattered with lively green. It looked so much like our own world, what it had once looked like. Yet it wasn't, because you were different. Instead of succumbing to the illness of technology and industrialization, you flourished, gazing at the stars like we never did, holding your convictions with a vigor we never held, flourishing like we never could. What was most fascinating of all was the call for connection, to meet one another, species to species, civilization to civilization. And it wasn't in the name of greed or fear, but rather discovery, knowledge and friendship. Yet the sheer blast of light, a burst of light so powerful that within days we'd already located the planet of origin 29 light-years away. It wasn't just the old telescope arrays that received it. Nearly every satellite in orbit managed to detect it, many of them frying from decades of disrepair and the sheer strength of the signal. Effectively killing many of the ancient guidance satellites that the majority of our own ancient ballistic missiles relied upon. Some said it was a message by the divine. Others claimed it was a cover-up for some secret anti-satellite weapon in the works. Yet I'd like to think of it as a happy little accident. The lights suddenly flickered. The colour face of the speaker rendered null for a few seconds as the ancient facility struggled to maintain its electrical hum. There was not a word of needless hesitation amongst the explorers. Those near the computer terminals began their rapid-fire examination into the facility's internal workings, seeking to at least unlock the bare mechanisms of the facility so that they could continue exploring its depths before the lights took their final breath. Ours began to sift through the alien display tables and consoles, desperately trying to find a map or a schematic of the facilities that could somehow grant them a miracle in the endeavour to understand what the facility even was. That left all but one explorer still listening to the tale of the speaker. That very sole explorer gazed at the speaker in absolute stillness, because from its eyes it viewed a message that one day billions of people would watch for themselves. Well, the war still happened, of course. The discovery of sentient alien life, while as a revelation as it was, wasn't enough to hold back a war decades in the making. But things changed. It wasn't instantaneous. No, it took years. I myself don't know how to really describe it. It was like a tingling sensation behind one's mind. Many people around me, those of the highest echelons of government, carelessly dismissed the discovery at first, too embedded in the meandering of the present, to reflect on what should have been a monumental moment in history. And yet there was that subtle atmosphere that clung to the minds of the elite. Not that of idealistic hope that was slowly boiling over in the masses, but something so much more. Hesitation. For out there beyond the polluted skies of our world lies an equal. Something that, across all our collective history, we'd never had. Though millions of billions of kilometers away from us, tucked in the embrace of an alien star, stood a mirror, a twin, a fellow peer, one that thrived while we languished. How would they look at us? Look at our dying world, our faltering people, our doomed future. Would they see us as savages, primitives, failures? When all was said and done, what would our legacy be to them? Ruined cities and skeletal remains? Would they one day find our corpses and look at us with pity or disdain for all our follies? It was that. The hesitation of what future they, the elite, would bring down upon our civilization. The hesitation, no, the fear of looking primitive to our cosmic brethren. Or what they think of the vestiges of our civilization. It festered in their minds, whether they knew it or not, just like a weed in the garden. I started first seeing it in the politicians and warhawks. After their warmongering speeches and populist rhetoric, they were suddenly disclosed their doubts in the privacy of bureaucratic hallways. Doubts spoke with a fear so existential, it seemed as if shivers cast down their lackluster spines, like fearing the retribution of the divine spirits, only except it wasn't the spirits they feared. No, it was you. Then it was on the news. After all the time I spent with the elite, I learned to see through their carefully manicured facades, to sense their hesitation, to decipher their lies. When I saw the daily propagandists starting to have momentary flickers of silence amidst their charged antics, I could tell there was hesitation in their minds. Soon enough, their words became more tempered, to a point that one could practically feel the hesitation coursing through their body as they kept on reading their propagandized scripts. Then came the masses. I myself still don't know how it all happened, whether it was the increasing doubt and hesitation that filled the war effort, decades worth of suppressed frustrations and grievances, or just the centuries of loss and decay finally coming to the breaking point. Yet it happened, and it was magnificent. Workers began to lay down their tools in protests across the nation. At first it was merely scattered protests, strikes and marches. Yet as days turned to weeks, entire sectors came to a crawl, as workers throughout the nation let their embers of discontent erupt for all to see. What were initially separate acts of protest began to coalesce into a unified front. Soon it was farmers, then it was the miners, until even whispers of mutiny amongst the soldiery began to make the rounds across the nation. What had once merely been a kindling of discontent was now set to be the spark to set the entire structure alight. Faced with a nationwide upheaval, faltering public support, alongside a war effort on the brink of total collapse, there was only one reasonable course of action for those of the highest echelons of government. Concede. And in the most frightening sane thing I've seen in the entirety of my life, I saw them do just that. Concede. And so the balance of power was nudged. In the end, it wasn't some sort of grand paradigm shift. The elite of old still held their elusive fingertips across the inner workings of society, but for once the people had now the allotted power to fight for something that hadn't been seen in generations. To fight for change. During this time of reformation and consolidation across the nation, came the realization that we needed guidance. Desperately. Our predicament was laid bare for all of us to see. The apathy in our institutions, the defeatism in our policies, and the general embedded sense of hopelessness found across our society. And so we searched for an exemplar to follow. A mentor. Solutions to the innumerable issues that befell before us to solve. And so people began to look towards you for solutions. Your people. Your planet. Your message. For you showed us a different path. Showed us that our fate was not inevitable. That out of the gloom and misery of our world, there was still a chance that we could change for the better. To survive. And maybe even thrive. When our diplomats ventured back onto the global fray, endeavouring to resolve the war that blazed across the world, a war that by this point had all become a meat grinder for civilization, they found something unimaginable. For when they gazed at their fellow foreign dignitaries for the first time in years, they felt that same subtle sensation of doubt enshroud them. Yet when they gazed into the eyes of their fellows, they saw a kindling spark within their eyes. I saw it too. Felt it. You couldn't call it hope just yet, but within those eyes lay the primordial desire for a better tomorrow. Months after the first fragile peace was settled, came the moment where the leaders of the globe would finally meet one another after decades of rapturous silence. A global summit after untold decades of repugnant isolation and apathetic discourse. Yet as they conversed and debated, they realized that they'd all come to a like-minded epiphany in one way or another. That this cycle of bloodshed, struggle and carnage can simply no longer be sustained. That we had to change, or be left to the grave. When ceasefires were signed and weapons laid down to rest, it seemed like a new dawn had risen in our civilization. Embassies reopened, dormant lines of communication slowly relit with activity, and the world started to slowly open up once more. Nations were beginning to discuss solutions to our problems, efforts being made to reclaim what was lost during the decades of decay and barbarism that had engulfed so much of the world. For the first time in recent history, we had a future that wasn't the horrid present that we had slogged through for generations. You could see it in the newscasts, see it on the streets, the way people walked, talked, even thought. No longer was the present the dominant governing drive of society, for inklings of something else, something new began to sweep the likes of me into having hope. The endurance to survive the present, the drive to see another day, and the hope to one day match the dream set out by you, our dear cosmic messengers. To say it simply, you reinvigorated us. However, it was all too late. All of it. All in vain. Our twilight had already long passed us. The inflection point, the threshold where our dying world would no longer be able to sustain continued advanced civilization. A threshold where our world's resources would dwindle to the point where eventually we would no longer be able to maintain anything outside a pre-industrial agrarian society. and such a society would almost certainly go extinct in the harsh and forgiving world that we have cultivated for ourselves over the centuries. We passed this threshold decades ago, and there was nothing we could do to fix. The alien took a deep breath in, their face flustered with what could only be described as frustration. His hand led to a smooth glass cup of water, taking a small sip before carrying on. Cooperation and friendship are great things, yet they can't so easily solve famines, resource shortages, and a world set to die. Conflict was inevitable, extinction was inevitable, yet still, there was this ever-meager idea that we could make it out, scrape our way out of the grave we dug ourselves. I was there when the heads of state came to this realization that we were on a path of permanent decline. There was no disagreement when the analysts explained their predictions, that of the permanent fall of technological civilization, a future perpetual dark age, a statistically assured extinction of our entire species. Hence, our inevitable extinction was declared for all the leaders of the world to hear. If we pronounced such revelations a few years, the world would have gone feral. Nations would squabble over the last resources. Existing social and political tension would boil over to engulf the world in conflict that would cement the end of civilization as we knew it. However, this was different. From the eyes of every representative on that fabled day, I saw cold, dreary stare. Yet it was not that of acceptance for our situation. For beneath that superficial bleakness lay the kindling fires of hope, that there was still a chance we could survive. There were still arguments, disputes, rivalries and the like, yet a consensus was formed, that the end times were approaching, and that the only way to possibly survive our inevitable downfall would be to act as a collective, a unified front dedicated to halting the clock on our extinction. Here it was decided that all still cohesive nations of the world would give up their ever-diminishing resources to the best and brightest of civilization, a cast I somehow find myself in the eyes of my superiors. We were given months to formulate our solutions. Our restraints were none, and our imaginations set to the skies. Many projects were offered as a possible remedy, some of them aiming to save civilization, others to preserve civilization, and some even to reduce civilization. Luckily, saner heads prevailed. Eventually, a few select projects were approved and given the appropriate resources to begin their work. One of those projects was of my own conception, the one that no doubt brought you down here in the first place. My life's work, and that of so many others, is a scientific marvel standing 300 meters above your heads. Its purpose? The speaker gestured around himself, at the silent computers and monotone lights, almost giggling to itself. To beg. Beg for help. Help from you. A feeble purpose, yes. Yet I am a realist. My thought process was quite simple. What if we were to reply to your message? What if instead of trying to save our doomed civilization, we instead take a gambit? A fool's gambit maybe, to have you save us. So it came to be Project Adil, my magnum opus. A 12-kilometer diameter radio telescope, aided with the most advanced computational and electronic technology the nations of the world could muster, all located on the secluded island where the inevitable decline of civilization would be of no matter to us. We worked around the clock, every day bringing with it new challenges that had to be solved, implemented and integrated into what became the last triumph of our civilization's sciences. By the time we had hit 2 years and found ourselves ever more limited by worsening resource shortages, we had to dumb down the ambition of our planned message, reduce the intensity of the transmission. Soon, more obstacles began to blot our progress. Failed geoengineering projects had turned the world cold, thick layers of clouds and aerosols becoming the norm for weather across the world. Difficulties that you must have noticed in the short bursts of binary that we sent off. Soon cracks began to reveal themselves across the ad hoc coalition of nations as the years ticked by. Nations began to severely disagree on what projects should be given the most attention, the ever-shrinking pool of resources and increasing domestic unrest, leading to only heightened tension between nations, as we raced against the metaphorical clock. Disagreements led to frustrations. Frustrations became grievances, and grievances became catalysts. Catalysts for new conflict. Old habits die hard, I guess. However, this time it did end up going nuclear, but that's not important. The speaker seemed to twiddle his appendages, a thin veneer of anxiety having slowly crept across his face. You probably figure that where you stand lies separate from my initial project, and you would be correct in the assumption. You see, my work was starting to have its funding pulled to more glamorous efforts. Things like interstellar colonization, the idea that a select few would be allowed to free our world, in a meager chance they'd one day come back as our saviors. It was a doomed endeavour, really. One that kept on getting all the funding and all the fame. It wasn't the idea itself, actually, rather the politics of it all. Yet none of that really matters now. So in the end I turned to other groups that could sustain the continuous demand of funds and resources that the project entailed. However, there were certain benefactors to my work. Those less enamoured with the ill-fated attempts of interstellar colonization, alongside other far-fetched projects, and more concerned with the continued survival of our species and civilization, who came to me with another project. A sudden controlled hiss of air reverberated across the room. The explorers, previously stuck working their way through the half-comprehensible displays in front of them, all shifted their vices to gaze upon the oddity in their midst. That oddity was that of a door, similar to the bulkhead they first thawed open. It was in the midst of slowly unlocking itself, giving off a heavy mechanical accent of gears and hydraulics, unwinding and screeching, until the bulkhead had all but opened itself, its interior revealing a small pathway lit by the faint dim glow of fluorescent lights. The explorers exchanged confused glances to one another, perplexed as to who had knowingly or unknowingly unlocked the door that just coincidentally aligned with the speaker's wording. Yet ultimately there was no discussion or interrogation on the matter. Instead, a handful of explorers willingly heading into the narrow pathway of the cryptic door. To say it simply, is the reason you're here. You probably noticed the terminals are written in your own language. That's because we had no intentions of operating this facility, nor will we be able to sustain it with our own deteriorating situation. What it is, well, I don't know. Nobody knows except the select few contractors that our benefactors sent over. Real hush-hush sort of stuff. Apparently so sensitive that they didn't even trust someone like me to know whatever they were building beyond the operating room. They did tell me one thing, though. That this project is some sort of backup. A safeguard in case total extinction were to strike our species. How optimistic they were. Safeguard. It's the only thing left of us now, and if my guesses are correct, then it's the only thing left that can make right on all of the grueling blood, sweat, and sacrifice we all put into this last-ditch attempt at survival. Yet it's up to you now, on what you do with it. Take this as our last stand, our last bastion of civilization. Tens of thousands of years of blood, sweat, and tears all leading to this. The culminating struggle of every civilization and people that have ever called our dear Anais home. Gaze upon the vestiges of our civilization, our people, our history, and elect for yourself on where our fate will lie. My dearest cosmic acquaintance, if you're even there, if you even came, thank you for listening. This is Director Lugano Valhorna, head of Project Daliel. On behalf of every soul that has ever called this world home, I beg you, help us in what we could not achieve. Every one of the still present explorers turned their opaque vices to gaze at the display to see what came next. What new message, revelation, or information would be thrown at them next. Yet as they waited, nothing came. Just the somber sight of the speaker, who suddenly sat there, twiddling his hands. That's it. That's everything I had on the script, added with a bit of babbling here and there. The speaker seemed relieved at first, like an invisible boulder had been lifted from his shoulders, yet he just sat there, unmoving, contemplating, all until his lips opened to a number veil. I'm not sure anybody is even going to see this. I mean, I'm talking to thin air right now, aren't I? The transmission's been sent now, but what's the chances anybody's going to actually come here? Let alone even find this place after who knows how long. Damn it. Last fucking person left on the planet, and this is what I'm doing in my last moments. I just had to screw the ending up, didn't I? The speaker took a solemn breath before speaking. The rest of the crew left, gone back to the mainland to spend their last waning days with their families before the inevitable happens. They're dead now. The final war ended 34 minutes ago. Nobody won. It's just me here, and a few other people, technicians and such, but they've decided to take their lives. Cyanide, simple, painless. Found their bodies in the control room with a few glasses of some homebrewed drinks. I don't blame them. The fallout is said to hit in 5 minutes, so better to go out peacefully, rather than radiation poisoning. I just wish I wasn't alone. I just wish I wasn't going to die alone. My wife, my kids. I left them back in the mainland for this fantasy project of mine. I should have been there for them. Say one final goodbye at least. Spirits curse me. I made a stupid decision, didn't I? An ashen tear flowed down from one of his eyes. His face slowly seemed to crumple like paper as it slashed against his chair. The speaker's eyes locked in mourning and contemplation as a single tear dropped off from his face. But there's nothing I can do now. Only the spirits will know if I made the right call. If what we build will stand the test of time until somebody finds us. If you're still watching this, human, if you ever do hear my voice, if you do one day reach this hallowed world, please remember us. Please remember me. And, if you wonder where I am... Lugano solemnly held out a small angular pistol out of his white coat. I'm going to go look at the ocean. One final time. The screen shut black. Permanently. Leaving only the explorers to process the tale they just heard. An atmosphere of mourning descended upon the room, each explorer expressing their remorse and heartache in their own way. Some gave whispered prayers, others kneeled in solitude, while most hanged their heads low in respect for the fallen. It was only after a burst of excitement beamed through one of the explorers' radios did the atmosphere begin to detach itself. "Captain, you have to come over. You gotta see this. They're not gone." The explorer who received the message was the one who stood alone recording the speaker's video, and after a few seconds of paralyzed bewilderment by the off-tone excitement, realized that the explorers who journeyed into the cryptic door had found something. Within a dozen seconds, the captain found herself coursing through the narrow pathway of the cryptic door until coming upon a litany of steel scaffolding, seemingly exposed all around to an ambient blue light. And there she saw a few other explorers who merely stood there, gawking at what they saw before them. Are these? Oh my god! Before them laid a cornucopia of large transparent silos, each of them containing what looked like hundreds, if not thousands, of small cylindrical vats. Their contents were evident for all to see. Cryogenically frozen embryos. What had to be hundreds of thousands of them. At that point, she felt something she hadn't felt in years. Hope. As the captain motionlessly awed at the scene before her, she couldn't help but shed a tear, hidden behind her visor. For out of all the destruction and tragedy she's seen across her travels, all the piles of skeletons and ruined cities, the despair that slowly grew in her mind with every new discovery, they managed to survive, to stand the test of time, to fight against the dark, for there was still hope for them. Like the first petals of a rose climbing from a grave, like a phoenix rising from fiery ash, a new civilization could rise from the vestiges of old. And so the captain smiled, knowing that the hopes and dreams of the speaker, of Lugano, had finally been fulfilled.